I would like to welcome you all to the Roundtable of September 20th. And I would like to start with a quote from George Eliot. And the quote goes something like this: "It is never too late to be who you might have been." Again, it is never too late to be who you might have been. What a quote. One of my heroes is the perfect example of that quote, and I want to talk about him a little. Born in Henryville, Indiana in 1890, if he knew what the next 65 years of his life would have been like, I promise you he would have chosen not to be born. What a life. Father dies at 5 years of age, works for a neighboring farmer at 10 years of age, and he's fired for having a bad attitude and insubordination. At 10 years of age? Joins the military at 16, then becomes a cable car conductor right out of the military. 1 month into the job, fired for a bad attitude and insubordination. 1 month. Goes to work as a steamboat pilot. Lasted almost a year. Then he was fired for a bad attitude and insubordination. Anyone noticing a theme here? Goes to work for the Southern Railroad. It lasts almost 2 years. Gets in a fight with one of his co-workers, and he's fired. But while he was working for the railroad, he got his law degree. Believe it or not, back then in the early 1920s, correspondence course made you a lawyer. First case he tried in court, very first case, gets in a fist fight with his own client in the middle of the courtroom, right in front of the judge. Disbarred within a week. End of his law career. Well, it's the booming 1920s. He goes out to sell life insurance for the Prudential Insurance Company. And he's pretty good. He discovers a talent. 6 months later, gets in an argument with his managers over commissions, and he's fired. For what reason? Insubordination. But then he gets a job as the Michelin Man. Does everyone remember the Michelin Man? Dressed him up in tires, went to country shows, went to fairs, sold lots of tires. He was good at this. He was good at promotional work. And then on his way to work, 2 months into the job, a cable snaps on a bridge he's driving over. His car plummets 42 feet into a lake. He cracks his skull open. While he's recovering, they fire him. Even when he didn't screw it up himself, the forces of nature screwed it up for him. And yet, the worst was yet to come. Now we're in 1930. We're in the Great Depression. And Shell Oil contacts our hero and says, look, we have an abandoned service station in Corbin, Kentucky. Why don't you move your family there and run it rent-free? All you do is pay us a little bit of the gas money that you get. What do you have to lose? Failed at everything else. He could pump gas. So he started pumping gas. And since Interstate 25 ran right by this gas station, he started to pump a lot of gas. And for the first time in his life, he was not living in a state of poverty. For the first time in his life, he was doing okay. Then one day a trucker drove in, said, you know something? In Corbin, Kentucky, there's no good place to get a meal. A bell rang off his head. Cleared out the storage room of the gas station, set up a table, a tablecloth, 6 chairs. Every time a driver came in, he said, you know, my wife Josie cooks up a real good meal. Why don't you join us? And they did. Truckers, millionaires would stop over. And the fare was traditional country fare. Country ham, fried chicken. And then one day, a company called National Presto out of Ohio got in contact with him and said, we have a new invention. And this invention will fry chicken in 8 minutes or less. 8 minutes or less. He said, this is fantastic. 8 minutes? And he bought it. It's called a pressure cooker. And he filled it with oil and chicken. And all of a sudden, a lot of people started to come when they drove their cars up for gas. They went into this cafe. He had to expand it. 4 tables, 6 tables, 8, 10. They loved his chicken. And then he got more creative. He added 11 herbs and spices after experimenting with his daughter Margaret. And he probably was making the best chicken in the world. And the restaurant grew. And he had to build a motel to accommodate all those who came to the restaurant. And for the first time in his life, he was living a fairly good life. He wasn't wealthy, but he was living a fairly good life. And he worked hard, day and night. 25 years, he worked very, very hard. And then the Planning Commission in Kentucky decided to reroute Highway 25 away from Corbin, Kentucky. The year was 1955. He just celebrated his 65th birthday, and he was bankrupt. Had to sell the motel, had to sell the cafe, had to sell the service station, $75,000. His total debts, $75,000. He had a $105 a month Social Security check. That was it. He had nothing else. But he had something else that was very, very important. He had a dream. He knew he made the best fried chicken in the world. He knew it. So he put the pressure cookers in a car, and he began going to restaurant to restaurant to restaurant. Folks, isn't it true that the biggest disappointments of our life are often our greatest blessings? He would tell every restaurateur within 100 miles of Corbin, I'll bet you my chicken's better than yours. And if it is, if I'm right, I'll make up the chicken for you. You pay me some of your increased profits. You don't get any more increased profits, you don't pay me a thing. What did I have to lose? And some major, major restaurateurs, Pete Harmon, Dave Thomas, they signed on. By the time he was 72 years of age, 7 years after he got started, he had 600 franchisees. He was making millions of dollars a year. And for many millions, he sold the rights to the American division, not the Canadian, American division, to John Y. Brown and Jack Massey. And from the age of 72 to 90 till he passed away in 1980, he was an ambassador for this company like no other. The most recognized corporate symbol in the world. Anyone here ever see Betty Crocker? I don't think so. Anyone here ever see Aunt Jemima? I don't think so. But everyone got to see this man. His name was, everyone? Colonel Sanders. I grew up eating buckets of chicken from Colonel Sanders. So did most of you. Why did it happen? Because it is never too late to be who you might have been. My first speaker trained all his life to be an engineer. Smart kid. Smart, smart kid. It takes brains to be an engineer. I couldn't be one. And he was so good at it, the government grabbed him right out of college, and he went to work for the government as an engineer. Not fulfilled by it. Wasn't the great ideal job that he wanted. Wasn't really the career that he wanted. But he was smart and he was good at it. And they gave him lots of time off. But he had in here a great dream. He loved finance. And part of that love was spurred on by the fact that he had a Wall Street whiz uncle who pushed him in that direction constantly. Oh, by the way, the Wall Street whiz uncle was me. 2013, he started to invest in Bitcoins, long before it became well known. As a matter of fact, he started to learn everything about Bitcoins, cryptocurrencies, blockchain. He knew it so well that by 2017, he formed a consulting company, and he helped hundreds upon hundreds of people and institutions invest in Bitcoins in the right way for the right purpose. And folks, I manage most of your money. You know that in a couple of years when the exchanges are in place, you know that in a few years when there are regulations that prevent dilution, I will be sending many of you to him as well. Chris proves every day of his life it is never too late to be who you might have been. Chris Mezzicappa.
Well, thank you, Stephen. That's the greatest introduction I've ever been given. I was looking forward to that for a long time, so that's actually the only reason I was here. If you got it on tape, I'm out of here. But my name is Chris Mezzicappa. I'm the owner and founder of Bitconsult LLC, and today we'll be talking about Bitcoin. So, who am I? Well, number one, I'm a proud husband and a father. It's my wife, Kelly, and we have a 3-year-old boy, Sammy, and a 4-month-old boy, baby Will. So that's first and foremost, always. As Stephen said, I wear lots of hats. Some of them are tinfoil, some aren't. But I'm also a mechanical engineer, project manager for the United States Navy. I make containers for missiles. I've been doing that for about 11 years, but like Stephen said, never really my passion. I always liked the deep analytics and shock and vibration analysis, like the project management end a little bit, but I've always loved finance. So when I met Stephen like 7 or 8 years ago, he was kind enough to sit down with me and teach me everything that I wanted to know about finance. So I went to his house pretty much every Saturday for 2 summers and learned discounted cash flow analysis. He was kind enough to offer me an opportunity to take the Series 7 and 66 and get my licenses. So I took him up on that. I was considering a change to finance full-time, but about 2 or 3 years ago is when I really went down the proverbial Bitcoin rabbit hole, which my friends on the left definitely know about. Most people don't know too much about Bitcoin. If they do learn something, it's usually from a speculative end. Maybe I can make some quick money, get out of here quick. But when you start learning about the game theory involved, the cryptography, Austrian economics, finance, it just inspires you to learn so much about so many different fields, and I can't find a way to pull myself out of it. I love it so much, and it's my passion now, so that's what I've been working on the last 3 years. So primarily, I've been a Bitcoin consultant, mostly working with investment advisors or groups of investment advisors who are starting to get questions about Bitcoin from their clients, don't really know how to answer them, but also doing a lot of work with blue-collar people who heard about Bitcoin on the job site, and then they come in to me and they say, hey, I'm looking to buy one of those Bitcoin packages. What do I do? And I have to say, slow down, slow down. There are no Bitcoin packages. Let's talk about what's actually going on here. So probably more importantly, who I am not, and that's a very important thing in this space, but you'll see I'm not a salesman. I don't get paid for selling Bitcoin. In fact, nobody gets paid for selling Bitcoin, and nobody sells Bitcoin packages. I'm also not a trader. So a lot of people in the space, Bitcoin's a very volatile asset, so it attracts a lot of day traders, swing traders. But I'm not a trader. I've never been big on technicals, always been a fundamental guy, partially thanks to Stephen. And the last one, I'm not a drug dealer. So, everybody thinks Bitcoin, oh, it's for drugs, right? Oh, it's for terrorism. Oh, it's like hacking or something weird. But you've got to take a step back and realize that a lot of new technologies, sometimes for legitimate reason, get associated with things that are illegal or maybe not the greatest things in the world. Just think about the internet when it first came out. It was pretty much message boards and porn. So if you gave up on the internet back then you probably missed out on a lot of stuff. So Bitcoin is a very complex topic, and I have a limited amount of time here. I'm going to kind of keep it at a high level, mostly for investment advisor kind of standpoint, world economic picture. But what is Bitcoin? So right now, that's the $150 billion question. That's the current market cap for Bitcoin. Bitcoin is really just a protocol, which is a set of rules for sending value over a peer-to-peer network. A peer-to-peer network is the network you see on the right here, which is a bunch of computers that are directly connected to each other, creating a kind of web, where a server-based network has a centralized server and a bunch of computers that connect to that server only. So it's more centralized, the server-based network. If that server goes down, you're in trouble. So Bitcoin, the Bitcoin protocol is a base layer for all types of applications, an entirely new internet, which you'll see a little bit in the later presentations. But one of those applications is currency, and that's mostly what we'll be talking about today. So Bitcoin as a currency. Bitcoin is decentralized. No single entity controls it or issues it like a central bank or a Federal Reserve. Bitcoin is censorship resistant. So assets cannot be seized, transactions cannot be invalidated or reversed. So if you hold Bitcoin in your own wallet, in your own private key, there's nobody who can take that money from you. There's no one who could freeze that account. There's no one who could invalidate your transactions. As long as you hold your Bitcoin the right way, which most people don't do, it is this unseizable asset. Bitcoin is limited in supply. 21 million Bitcoins will ever in total be produced. We're currently at about 17.7 million through mining. Bitcoin allows for fast borderless payments to anyone at any time. Pseudo-anonymous, so if you have a Bitcoin address, you could send it to any other valid Bitcoin address, whether it be a 12-year-old programmer in India or your neighbor next door. Bitcoin is programmable smart money, and that's what gets a lot of people excited, especially a lot of people who dip their toes into Bitcoin and then start to learn a little bit about Ethereum, and they learn about these things called smart contracts, where you could do something as simple as say, hey, pay my son $10 at the end of the week. You could program that into Bitcoin very easily. Very simple example. Or pay my son $10 when he does his chores. And you could have different things activate that. But the real big takeaway that I want to talk about today is Bitcoin is a global internet currency that's built for the 21st century. And to me, the most important thing you could say about Bitcoin is that it's separation of money and state. So who controls your money? You do, right? That might be the case if you have cash in your pocket or in your massive vaults under your castle. But just think about cash for a second. Countries around the world are trying to restrict cash payments. One example, just last year, Australia banned cash purchases over $7,500. You might think, oh, that's not that important, over $7,500. I don't transact that much over $7,500 in cash in person. But cash has always been a mainstay of America and just a final settled payment. No waiting for a check to clear, no applying for a credit card account or anything like that. In 2015, Greece shut down their banks in an effort to prevent collapse. Deposit insurance evaporated overnight. So a lot of people think they're safe, and most of them are. They're in America, they got their $250K FDIC-backed insured money. The thing is, FDIC exists until it doesn't. And we saw companies like AIG go down in 2008. So FDIC is a couple layers removed from that, and the United States in general is in a much better position than most other countries. But just realize deposit insurance is a given until it's not. In 2013, the Bank of Cyprus depositors lost 47.5% of their savings overnight. So if you're not familiar with Cyprus, it's a country like the Mediterranean. It's where a lot of Russians store their offshore bank money, kind of like the Caribbean. This is actually what made me take a heavy interest in Bitcoin as a financial product, is because when the Bank of Cyprus collapsed, the price of Bitcoin went up like 8x that month. And I think it was because a lot of money from offshore bank accounts started to flow into Bitcoin. But those guys, one day you have 100K in your account, next day you have 50K. Why? The government couldn't pay their bills. 2010, Visa stopped all payments to WikiLeaks. So while federal agencies and law enforcement agencies need warrants to actually stop certain things or to seize assets or to invade your house, financial service companies can kind of act as the long arm of the law in many instances, particularly credit card companies. So one example is 2010, US government says, yo, WikiLeaks, this is out of control. Visa, stop allowing payments to them. They were hoping that would choke out WikiLeaks and that WikiLeaks would collapse because they couldn't bring in money anymore. Well, it happens that Bitcoin was invented in 2009, and for that reason, WikiLeaks started accepting Bitcoin as payments and ended up making a ton of money because in 2010, Bitcoin was like under $1. So not only were they able to take in money, but they made a lot. A smart man, I think he's in the back of the room, once told me, there's only two things you could count on: death and Venezuela or Argentina defaulting on their loans every 10 years. So that's the first time I really started to take notice, and I started to look at countries like Zimbabwe, who now has a $100 trillion banknote. That's not good. Venezuela last year, 17,000% inflation. Obviously, there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of political turmoil, scarcity of assets, oil factors into the picture with Venezuela. But this is a real situation happening right now where shoppers don't know if they'll have enough money to buy bread the next day. And to kind of put that into pictures for you, worthless money, this picture is from like a month ago, worthless money is being left in the streets of Venezuela. So it's just in the gutters right now. So just imagine hoarding all this cash your whole life and it just becoming worthless over the course of a couple months. Wheelbarrows of cash are being brought to the grocery store so people can buy stuff. So to buy chicken, that's how much physical cash you need in the largest denominated bills to buy one chicken in Venezuela. So because of this, a lot of Venezuelans, they have no other way out. A lot of them tried to buy US dollars, but Venezuela has a listed currency exchange rate of the bolivar to the US dollar. In reality, the only people with access to that are the top government brass, the generals, the president. Everyone else trades at a black market rate, which could be like 10 times worse. So a lot of Venezuelans took to mining Bitcoin in their house with the electricity. They kind of had free electricity too because oil is so prevalent there. But they also just started buying Bitcoin. The Venezuelan government tried to clamp down on it a little bit, so they do a lot of local Bitcoin transactions, which is, hey, meet somebody in person, do the Bitcoin exchange, so it's not through an official exchange that looks like, E-Trade or, Coinbase or anything like that. Just a little more on inflation. Inflation is not only a product of third world countries, it also happens in America. As everyone knows, they hear stories from their grandparents about when a burger used to cost like 50 cents. Now, there's a lot boiled into inflation, and US has actually done a great job of managing inflation. A lot of people actually thought that prices would start to spiral out of control after the 2008 financial crisis. That actually hasn't been happening, and inflation has been relatively low in the United States. But it's just, again, to make the point that if you do hoard cash even, if you hoarded it from 1913, you're losing like 99% of your value. The interesting thing that's actually going on now, since inflation isn't happening, is there's crazy monetary wars right now of different countries devaluing their currencies against each other, trying to up their exports, and trying to stimulate their economy. So they're trying to both stimulate exports and also stimulate borrowing by offering very low interest rates. In fact, there's now $15 trillion in negative yielding sovereign debt, which when you think about it, you lock up your money for 10 years with the government, you expect to get a pretty good return on it, 2%, 3%, 4%. There's over $15 trillion in negative yielding debt, which means you deposit 10K with a country, lock it up for 10 years, you might get 9,500 back, which is absolutely crazy to think about. Why are people doing that? It's because they have no other place to put their money. They don't feel like there's any safe havens for their investments. So when I talk about safe havens, I'm talking about places where you can put your money and be confident that it'll still be there. Either that it won't be inflated out of control or that the company that you're investing in doesn't fall apart. So when I talk about safe havens, the classic safe haven is gold. So if you look at this chart of gold prices here from 2014 to 2019, this is in euros, but went from about $9.50 to $12.50, and this chart's about a month old. But in the US, the price of gold went from like $900 an ounce like a year and a half ago to like $1,600 as fears have risen across the global economy, as the US fights other countries to devalue their currency. And in the same time frame, obviously you could kind of like cherry pick here and come up with a correlation that may not be causation, but Bitcoin in the last 9 years has gone from like $1 to $10,000 a coin. Personally, I see it and I use Bitcoin as a safe haven for my assets. As a federal employee, my TSP is locked up with the federal government, my annuity is locked up with the federal government, my pension. My house is a single location, single asset in New Jersey. Everything I do is denominated in US dollars. So I buy a bunch of gold, but I also stock up on Bitcoin as well. If you want to store something in that chain, you actually need to use Bitcoin to do that. Probably will run out of time before I have the chance to really talk about that today, but just mentioning it. So recently people have started to agree that Bitcoin has a lot of value. As of August 2019, a single Bitcoin is worth over $10,000 with a total market cap at around 180 billion. So Bitcoin has all of the characteristics of money, including durability. Bitcoin are entries on a global ledger that everyone contributes to and that everyone agrees on through the Bitcoin network. Portability, you can store the Bitcoin private key, pretty much like the password to your funds, in your head. So it's usually a 12-word phrase that represents a cryptographic private key. But what that does is allow someone to actually leave a country with value. Instead of strapping gold bars to their chest or stuff in their pockets with worthless dollars, they could actually leave with a private key in their head or a thumb drive with the key written out, or even on a piece of paper, their private key written down. So that's been huge for people fleeing like autocratic organizations or sovereign nations that are trying to harm them or that have lost control of their economies. Divisibility, Bitcoins are infinitely divisible. You don't have to buy a whole Bitcoin, you can buy a fraction of a Bitcoin. Bitcoins are fungible. Each one is as good as the next. None of them are earmarked like with a serial number that says this dollar is no longer good because it was involved in a crime. scarcity, which we covered, and then programmability. How do you buy Bitcoin? A lot of people were scared, even if they were convinced of the Bitcoin story and that people should control their own currency. They're like, well, how do I actually buy the thing? And up until like 2010, you had to find someone who already owned it, because Bitcoin started as just this little project that someone came up with in 2009, convinced other people to run the software, to validate the blockchain, and to support transactions. So you had to like know somebody in the first couple of years. Then it went to some exchanges like Bitstamp, which is now based in Switzerland, where you actually had to wire money. But now the on-ramps are so easy. Coinbase, which is registered in New York, which is one of the hardest states to get registered in as a money transmitter. You go to coinbase.com, it looks just like E-Trade. Just log in, create an account, do an ACH transfer from your account, and it's an easy buy. They also got added to Robinhood and Square Cash. So a lot of these apps where millennials are more likely to use, they want a quick on-ramp. That's the easiest way to get onboarded. However, can you leave your coins on an exchange? The whole point of Bitcoin is not to just buy this thing and to speculate and to keep it on an exchange, because you know what? You buy your coins on Coinbase, you leave them there, you're vulnerable to Coinbase's. Number one, they could go bankrupt. You lose your money. Number two, they could seize your assets for their own reason. Number three, the US government could tell them to seize your assets. So what you do is you take your coins from the Coinbase exchange or from Robinhood or wherever, and you send it to your own private address, which is really just a username and a password, pretty much for control over your own money. And it's a concept that's based off of public key cryptography, which we don't have time to get into now. But the key is that you just write this password down, you can store it in a vault, and you know that you can't get your money hacked, nobody can steal it from you, as long as you control these 12 words or this password that you wrote down, which is crazy to think like Bitcoin is this crazy technological achievement of cryptography and game theory and networking. But ultimately, if you want complete control of your own money, you can write it down on a piece of paper. Bitcoin is highly volatile, so I can't leave any talk without talking about the volatility. Most people think that they could handle volatility. Most people that I've worked with, both through traditional finance and through cryptocurrency, they can't handle nearly as much volatility as they think they can. So I always tell people to buy a little bit to start learning, have a little bit of skin in the game to start actually figuring out what is going on here. But never throw all your money into one basket. Always buy in thirds with any kind of product, because Bitcoin could drop 30% overnight. It's had swings of negative 90% about 4 or 5 times now. So I always give a warning there. As far as Bitcoin's price potential, like I said, I mostly see it as a competitor to the store of value, gold alternative kind of aspect, the revolution of people taking control of their own money. Gold is currently valued at about $7 trillion, with Bitcoin at about $150 billion. You could do the math for what percentage Bitcoin ends up taking over. But I see it more as an offshore bank alternative. And if Bitcoin takes even 1% of the money in offshore bank accounts, the market cap of Bitcoin goes to a level where each coin is worth about 66K. So that's kind of like my price target for the next probably 3 years. And that's not even counting like the velocity of money and the flow in. But we're seeing more institutional buy-in. There's a lot of people pushing for ETFs in Bitcoin, which is actually, again, kind of totally counter to what Bitcoin's meant to be. You're supposed to hold your own private keys, kind of like holding your own gold bars in your safe. You don't want to trust an ETF, or you don't want some leveraged product that may not even own the underlying. So there's as much as $40 trillion stored in offshore bank accounts right now. So that's where I'm pulling those numbers from. And again, the gold values are about 8 trillion. Bitcoin's also a tool for international remittances. So like I said, I've done work with people when I've needed coding done or I needed a website built. Instead of them having to set up a credit card system and become a merchant, I could just send them Bitcoin transactions. It's an alternative to going through Fiverr or these other websites where you kind of get contract labor from other countries, but pay a huge fee for the convenience. A lot of people think Bitcoin will replace Western Union, and Western Union is actually working with some cryptocurrencies like XRP to kind of try to speed up their process, because their fees are incredibly high, and it takes a while to get money through Western Union. How much time do I have, Stephen? I was going to try to wrap it up pretty quickly, but
We don't know if one of my speakers is showing, so.
all right. So a lot of people are interested in Bitcoin as a consumer currency, and I think this was very important at the beginning to try to convince people of the value and to be able to actually buy physical products now. But if you paid attention to Bitcoin in like 2017, there were so many people using the specific Bitcoin BTC network that blocks were full, which raised transaction fee costs and was actually kind of like a bottleneck. So a lot of alternative solutions started popping up in 2017 that either use the majority of the Bitcoin code base or they kind of are like a spin-off of Bitcoin to try to do faster, quicker transactions. Honestly, I don't see payments as being the major thing in play here. I think it's more the security of the network. If you want to attack the Bitcoin network, you need to come at it with more hash power than is currently on the network. Hash power is just a fancy word for computing power, computations per second. And Bitcoin is by far the largest supercomputer in the world now. So even if there were hidden supercomputers in the United States, people have been tracking like the silicon supplies to see if even ASICs or application-specific integrated circuits are available to mine this thing. But the bottom line is to attack Bitcoin, you know exactly how to attack it. You need to attack it with more hash power than is on the network. And what's on the network right now is by far the biggest supercomputer in the world. You can set up a system through Bitcoin where people can pay to use that outlet. You can lock it the rest of the time and then charge people for whatever. So it's just kind of a little bit of the potential of what I like to call streaming money. So also there's a lot of people who are fed up with going to a website. I know I get fed up with the Wall Street Journal and Financial Times in particular. I try to read their stuff online. They either have it behind a paywall where I need to sign up for a newsletter, or I need to pay like 20 bucks a month. I have to remember to cancel it. It's a real pain. So we're building in micropayments into Bitcoin and Bitcoin SV, where you could actually, instead of signing up for an account, giving away all your information, or wasting your time on ads, you just slide a little button to the right. Your wallet is built into Chrome or Firefox or whatever you're using, and you pay 2 cents to view the article. So some of my friends are working on a product right now called Twetch, which is like Twitter, but on the blockchain. To post, you have to pay 2 cents. If you get likes or any replies to your comment, you get 2 cents. So you could kind of view it as like monetized attention. So if you put out good content and people are interested in it, you could get paid for it. But I think the more important takeaway here is that in order to participate in this network, you need to use Bitcoin. So that reduces the amount of trolling going on. So the people who are just jumping in the comments section of either Twitter or different websites and just posting the nastiest stuff for no reason. They'll actually be incentivized not to do that because they need some skin in the game and they need to put some money on the line to participate in those conversations. So a lot of this stuff that's being built on this new internet where money is tied with information at the very base layer, a lot of that stuff is just starting to be built in like the last 6 months. Okay. So we didn't really have too much time to talk about what the Bitcoin ledger actually means, but just know if you send a Bitcoin transaction, it gets put into the Bitcoin blockchain and it gets buried under a mound of hash power or a mound of computer work. And then anyone who participates in the Bitcoin network is also storing this ledger of information, and they're storing your data. So it's much more secure than putting your information on someone's server, which could be hacked. Instead, you're storing a copy of your information on thousands of computers around the world, which are protected by a massive amount of computing power. So finally, how can you leverage Bitcoin? Personally, I went into a little bit how I use it as a hedge to all my federal and USD holdings. But specifically, I work mostly with investment advisors who are getting questions from their clients. Hey, I want to buy Bitcoin. What should I do? And that usually spirals into, hey, I want to buy Ripple. Is that a good idea? Or I heard about this other thing. And it kind of gets into like the penny stock kind of territory where you actually have to say, stop, slow down. You need to learn a little bit first. And it's important that I think all investment advisors start to get that kind of knowledge, or that they at least have a POC that they could send their clients to and do their due diligence. So in conclusion, Bitcoin, I believe, is sound money that's built for the 21st century. It's got incredible potential, but incredible risk and specifically volatility. And Bitcoin is much more than money. We barely even got to scrape the surface on cryptography in general, let alone the applications being built on Bitcoin. But I hope I gave you an interesting monetary overview and kind of sparked your interest a little bit to do some more research. So thank you.